You'll know when I click the wrong one. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. My name is Sam Donovan. I'm the Director of Outreach and Strategic Engagement with the BioQUEST Curriculum Consortium. And what an opportunity. What a group of people, what a location, a set of resources. And in my sort of position as a kickoff keynote, I'm sort of taking a big picture, half motivational talk, half pep talk for everybody, and then just a call so that we all have some shared interests and shared values, because this is a long-term process, right? This is going to take a while, and while we each work in our own classrooms and we each work in our own sub-disciplines, we're going to share a lot of experiences, and being able to share those across projects will be very valuable. Okay, let's see how this goes. Yeah, so I love it, right? How many times do you go and you get to give a talk when it says educators and researchers interested in the integration of open science into undergraduate biology classrooms? Woohoo! People interested in presenting their work and new ideas, relationships with other science educators, we're in the right place. And then just a little frosting on the cake, the education lab has just opened up, and I'm excited to see that and just celebrate the kind of work that's done here, from the open science to the robust education team and the contributions that are being made, because we really need them. And there's a lot of power in open pedagogy and open ethos and open science. Okay, so looking through an open lens to imagine the future of biology education. Here are my three sections. I'm going to invoke Janus, the Roman god of beginnings and transitions, and it's the two-headed god, I have a picture in the next slide, who looks forwards and backwards. And I think that's really important for us, because while we're emerging into this open education and open science culture, it's still pretty early, and there's a lot of emphasis on inquiry and so forth that's come before. And then thinking about, as I was mentioning, that we're dipping our toes into a pretty big ecosystem of resources and opportunities and tools, and I think we just need to have a big picture of what's going on out there, because it's going to force us to interact with people that we generally don't interact with. And then thirdly, faculty, right? This is where it starts and often ends for me, right? We are the lever for impacting the students, translating the science, and really emerging a new vision for undergraduate biology education. So, stick with me. Let's see if I skipped anything. Okay, so here we go. So here's our Janus sculpture, and this is something that the BioQUEST Curriculum Consortium, the organization that you said 2003, you were in 7th grade. Well, I attended my first BioQUEST Curriculum Consortium Summer Institute for faculty when I was, I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but it was 1992. And so, right, we can't do this without understanding where we've been a little bit. And here, Dewey, right, it takes you right back. John Dewey has been advocating for the engagement with the generation and justification of knowledge, not simply looking at the findings of science. And in this slide, it's really emphasizing the fact that we were doing this before this whole sort of computational space, access to things online was happening. But you know, his philosophy had many impacts and is still resonant today. And now we can look a little bit more recently. David Asai wrote a nice editorial where he's talking about, yeah, these technical barriers are evaporating, in the sense that if you know the web address or you have an account, you can get in and click some buttons or maybe enter a little script and get access. But that doesn't mean it's accessible, and it doesn't mean that it's inclusive. And so that potential, that power of engaging people with their own problem solving, getting to really hands-on experience, knowledge generation, and justification from their own perspective is not everywhere, right? We're getting there. Just like the scientists are learning to be open, the educators are learning to be open as well. And some of the presenters I'm really excited to see because there are some real experts in the house. So here's a pretty classic driver in undergraduate biology education, vision and change, that spelled out the big break here was we're going to reduce the content, we're going to focus on skills, we're going to focus on broad conceptual understanding, including communication, right? I mean, these are soft skills. These are things students have to be able to do. Collaboration, quantitative skills, interpreting data. Of course, there are some other things like modeling and simulation. But this has been around for a while, and it's had some impact. We've got another talk that's going to address some of the ways that vision and change has had an influence. Davita's here. She and I are on a project called iGels that focuses on vision and change impacting non-majors courses, general education courses. And so these things have been popping up in sort of every new turn, right? A few years ago when data science became all the rage, we have this shifting set of targets that we're trying to incorporate into our classes, and oftentimes they're in conflict with content, right? And we're having to do some trade-offs. And how are we going to take these? Are we going to treat them individually? Do we give students an activity on scientific literacy? Or can we address these in a richer context of actually doing some science or some aspect of science so that they're engaged and I'll mention, in case I forget to mention it, we have to mention to them that we are focusing on some of these things because otherwise they won't even realize it. So just a tiny bit about BioQuest. It's now 39 years young. Evolution and revolution in STEM education. We changed our tagline a few years ago because we felt like it needed to be a little bit more revolutionary. We are a nonprofit, which gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we can interact with grant projects and institutions and so forth. And I'll just briefly read our mission here. Transformative, collaborative, community, empowering educators, driving innovation for all students. Unique professional development opportunities. We work with future faculty and collaborative projects, right? We try to facilitate other people's projects and the broad aim of student success in STEM. Well, Carlos, let me tell you. It's not a plant, he just knows me too well. So you'll notice on our logo there, which is actually an acronym that I won't do, but there are 3 Ps. And in fact, you'll see here there are 5 Ps, but we're going to focus on the first letter. John Junk, who was at Beloit College for many years, and is now at the University of Delaware, was one of the founders of BioQuest, and he was very interested in the role of computers in helping students think, right? Using them as reasoning tools, using them as analysis tools, and it was really fighting against the early computerization that was content delivery, right? Here it is, we've got a way for you to click through and learn, and we can check whether you understand it at that very content level. And so he's got a genetics background, and in genetics, it's all about the problem solving. I'm going to give you some problems. You're going to learn to recognize those classes of problems, solve those problems, and you will display your understanding. But it's such a narrow view of what scientists do. And so the emphasis on extending that reasoning in both directions. Where do those problems come from? Right? If somebody hands you a problem, it's not your problem. Your investment in it may be very low. But if you are articulating a problem, if you're refining a problem, if you're trying to do some background to understand if anybody else has been working on this, you're in that problem posing space. And it often gets ignored in undergraduate education. We hand students problems. At the other end, you turn it in, you say, oh, it's clearly codominance because of the ratio of the phenotypes. Okay, that's like back of the book kind of answer. But there's an important part of science around peer persuasion. So you are responsible for not just convincing yourself, but for convincing somebody else. And these are not back in the book problems, right? So one of the big contributions of BioQuest early on was a program called Genetics Construction Kit that allowed instructors to generate a problem generator, but it was probabilistic. So the teacher didn't know the answer. And the students would make crosses and do all of these things and could be very complicated and then say, here's my answer. And the teacher could say, well, that doesn't help me. I don't know the answer. You got to tell me your reasoning. You have to tell me how you got your answer, why you got your answer. And so this was a philosophy that drove a lot of the early software development at BioQuest. Oh man, you guys are going to make me talk for too long. Is that going down? Okay, good. So just a little bit to give you an idea of how long 39 years is. John Junk and BioQuest community broadly was very interested in this notion of open publishing, that you could take someone else's work and build on it and customize it for your own students or your own instructional context. And so we started the BioQuest library, and volume 5, so years 98 and 99, it was on CD. And it was so exciting because it wasn't floppy disks anymore. And so I put that one up there just to let you know where that stands. And then, you know, we, in collaboration with lots and lots of communities and institutions and faculty, have run a long series of NSF projects. We had, you know, 20-some years of continuous funding. But these are just a couple of examples. Numbers Count that focused on using data to identify and solve problems. Bedrock was early bioinformatics using a tool called the Biology Student Workbench. Beagle Investigations Return with Darwinian data. Pre-broadly accessible internet, we were trying to collect and make accessible raw data associated with the Galapagos Islands. And then I just put this one in to remind you that we run annual summer faculty workshops. They used to be 10 days face-to-face. That was brutal. And now we're in a mixture of online and face-to-face. Okay. So one of the early drivers for all of these projects was a statement by Jim Collins, a very deep thinker, former director of National Science Foundation's Biological Sciences Division. And he said it's simple. Does what we're doing in the classroom reflect what we do as biologists? And it's a pretty hard question to avoid, right? And so we all know that science is changing, right? Explosion of information, technology. I mean, a lot of data is just collected electronically now. It never has a physical, I mean, it has a physical manifestation, but it gets measured and stuck in the computer right away. Interdisciplinarity, we can't work without computer scientists and the chemists and others. And then that, you know, while science was evolving and responding to some of these changes, science education was generally not, or not nearly as quickly. And so we had this kind of growing distance and needed to address that. So this was a very easy marker to sort of check ourselves and give us some ideas. So it's not just one thing, right? So we have two axes here. We have the participation of students, and we have students as a receptacle or the audience for things. And then sometimes we're emphasizing the content, right? What came out of it or what we understand from it. And sometimes we're emphasizing the process. And so these quadrants, they're not clean and totally distinct, but they're each worth attention. And you want to do inquiry all the time, maybe, but you really can't. You have to sort of move around within these quadrants. And I actually use this with students to be very explicit about where we are. So today we're talking about how we go through the process of designing an experiment. And we may not collect the data, we may not do all the work around it, but here are the learning outcomes, and they tie to some of these activities. Norm Letterman, I don't have the reference up here, but I can share it with people, who's at the Illinois Institute of Technology, a science educator, did some very interesting research over the years focused on how students develop their understanding of the nature of science. And people were building cool inquiry labs and having students do all sorts of work. But they found out if they didn't explicitly require that the students stop and reflect on why that represented an actual sort of nature of science practice, that they just saw it as a list of instructions. It's like, I'm following the protocol, I'm doing the thing. And so they found these very carefully developed curricula implemented by teachers who were doing a really good job getting the students to do the things, but if they didn't stop them and have them reflect on how this connects to these deeper understandings about the practices of science, were not connecting well. They weren't really picking it up. So here's my straw man, the sort of linear and simplistic notion of a nature of science. I had the pleasure to be part of a project called Understanding Science, again, back in the day. And one of our primary drivers was to break that simplistic model and start to contextualize science so that it wasn't simply this algorithmic, p-value kind of driven understanding, but in fact, the creative parts are there, and the community parts are there, and the political, economic, social impacts are there, right? I mean, science has its boundaries. It can't tell you what you should do, but it can sure tell you what might happen if you do that. So I would recommend going and checking this out. The site's still up. But wait, there's more. When you blow these open, you can see, and it just didn't reproduce very well, but these are full of details about what goes on within, say, testing ideas. And so it gives you lots of examples where you could have tie-ins that give a richer picture to students about the integrated nature of science. But of course, you have to remind them that you're doing that, so I print this out and put it up on the wall so I can point to it. The cool thing about this tool is that you can map scientific research, sort of careers to it. And so this happens to be a map of the Wagner's identification of asteroids as the main driver of dinosaur extinction 65 million years ago. And so you can go to the website and they have this all animated out, and they talk about different parts of it, and then you can see the path of the activity through the map. So there are so many interesting ways to move beyond the small view of science. All right, I'm wrapping up here on this background, because my PhD is in science ed, so I have to do this. It's required. Right, we all focus on the explicit knowledge, right? The stuff that's in the textbook, the what part. But this is a very unstable object if it doesn't have the tacit part. If we don't understand where it came from, it lives in the practices, right? And so when we focus on the content exclusively and we miss the generation and justification of knowledge and all the things that go with it, we are giving a very fragile understanding. And John Seeley Brown is a really thoughtful author around this stuff. Okay, section 1. Looking back and looking ahead, we've got lots and lots of history on promoting student engagement, participation in authentic inquiry, doing the intellectual work of building knowledge. We need to extend that. And we have emerging practices. Open is a key one, but there are all sorts of quantitative things in coding and different kinds of collaboration that are going on now. So we need to sort of fold all of those in, but not leave behind what we already know. And then this is sort of get the right thing here, an outcome from that. Science is not going to stop changing. And so we need to think of ourselves as a continuous improvement model, right? We have hopes and aspirations for our class and our students, and we need to be in a professional space where we have a plan, we try it out, get a little feedback, collect a little data, share it with our friends, come back next year and do it a little differently. You can't change everything all the time, but I've heard way too many people say, well, we'll figure this out and then we'll be done. And it just doesn't generally operate like that. Okay, an ecosystem, thinking about this interface of open science and open education. And I know in the title of the symposium, the emphasis is on open science, and I applaud that. But you'll see that several of the other presenters, I'm looking at you, Karen, is an expert in open education, and it's an amplifier, right? Open science resources are phenomenal. They allow you to do things that would otherwise be impossible in your classroom, but you can empower students through open education strategies, and I'm leaving a lot of that discussion to others. Thank you, Rachel, for the setup here. Underlying practice, we want to increase the accessibility, transparency of our professional work. And you'll notice that I've said open practices. It's across science and education. Involves making the resources available, encouraging collaboration. Equity and inclusivity are some of the foundational things for me. But two caveats here, and again, I can provide references for these if you're interested. Just because open science resources or open education resources are free does not mean that they are free, right? Somebody built them, somebody invested in them. And so we have to acknowledge that and honor that. And then just because they're open doesn't necessarily mean they're more equitable, right? They still may not be accessible to certain populations. And so it's an active process of making it as accessible and inclusive as possible. So it really takes a village. And here are some of the stakeholder groups that we're working on a little project now that are going to play a role as we increase the connections between open education and open science. So service providers. What's a service provider? Well, the Allen Institute, right? They do trainings, they generate data, they distribute the data, they're running all the servers and stuff. So, right, this is where a lot of the work happens. Online analysis tools. I'm going to make an argument here in just a minute that there's a role for open education service providers as well. And that is not nearly as widely understood. yet, but we're working on it. Of course, we have to include the students, include the faculty. You know, there are huge investments in reform practices in undergraduate STEM. When you look at the money that's available, we have a lion's share of it. Part of the role of the service providers is to sort of capture and amplify and stabilize some of what those outcomes are. Too often this happens. You get your 3-year NSF grant, work your butt off, put it up on a website, and then your funding runs out and you move along. And that is not a sustainable model. So to be more open, we have to think about sustainability and long-term accessibility. But then, you know, there are departments or other campus groups. Sometimes your science librarian or your teaching and learning center will have a specialist in open science. Great resources there. Education researchers are going to help us, and we need to help them. We need to make ourselves available to so that people can study some of these things. Of course, funders pay the bills, and professional organizations are they're deep wells of disciplinary knowledge, and they can bring those together through their their education committee or through consulting or collaborating on a project. So when you're thinking about, as I think Rachel said, it's just because it's there doesn't mean it's easy. It's going to take input from many, many different kinds of stakeholders. Another good setup you gave me. You've seen this. The UNESCO, there's a nice fact sheet on understanding open science, and I just love the breadth of their vision. And as mentioned, we tend to think of resources, right, the outcomes, but there are all sorts of other things, the practices, the interacting with other systems, and the infrastructures, which we'll talk a little bit more about, that go into making open science truly open. So I'm sure we'll hear about a variety of great examples. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. Course-based undergraduate research experiences, science education for civic engagements. I see you, Davida. Community-based participatory research, and education reform projects. So let's just take a quick look, and I just chose a couple wildly successful things. I was at the University of Pittsburgh for 20 years in the biology department. I got to work with Graham Hatfull. He's an amazing person. With the help of Howard Hughes Medical Institute, he has now running a lab that is national, right? This program is collecting data and centralizing it, and students are publishing. So my understanding is this paper was the second most authors on a scientific paper. Can you guess the first one? Higgs boson. So, right, team science, right? It's not crazy to have 100 authors anymore. This is pretty crazy. But right there in the author list, the Science Education Alliance, Phage Hunters Advancing Genomics and Evolutionary Science courses. And this is the last sentence of the abstract. Phage isolation and analysis was performed by a large consortium of academic institutions, illustrating the substantial benefits of a disseminated, structured program involving large numbers of freshmen. One of Graham's strengths and visions was that this has to happen early. Right? We can't wait till a capstone event, because they may not be around for the capstone if they haven't been engaged earlier on. This is also a great reminder that this is not a one-way street. Open science is providing resources and educators are picking them up and using them. That happens a lot. I grab data sets and they happen in my class and not much else. But there are lots of examples where the student science and the learners are contributing to the scientific resources. The Sensor project has been around for how long? At least 20 years? Not 39. Really focused on another important aspect of making the science connect. Connect with your community, connect with something you can see, connect with something you care about, and supporting civic engagement and civic responsibility. So just a couple of examples of a host of resources that they have. Great example of connecting science to students' lives. This broad term of community-based participatory research is often thought of as citizen science. That works as well. Some of these are using students or other learners as data collectors, which is a little bit light sometimes on the science, but there are ways to do it well, and there are ways to improve projects, and it's amazing how motivated people get and how engaged. And the best thing to do is to do your local water sampling or bud burst project or whatever it is, Monarch Watch, and then go back to the national database and extract and do some comparisons and look at a time series. So it's a way into larger data sets if you know something about where that data came from and how it might be useful at scale. And then education reform projects. There's just a vast distributed reservoir of resources, and I just pulled one that was pretty recent, focusing on some ecology. It has some of the coding focus in it. And here's their sort of, almost their logic model for building these resources is that they want students to explore the data, then sort of connect that to concepts, and then go through some steps to actually do an analysis. And then they've generated a variety of tools or activities that follow that structure. Lovely, right? And I hope they're published as open education resources. I can't imagine they're not, but I can't confirm that. Okay, so that was kind of on the curriculum side. And now I want to think a little bit about the tech side, the infrastructure side, because it's not trivial, right? The data sets are large, the computational tools often take more than our laptops or iPads or whatever your students are using to work with. And so this part of the UNESCO Open Science map is focused on infrastructure, and lots of it's virtual, but there's also connection to physical tools that you can use. And so they use the term gateway. Sometimes it's called online research environments, but they're community-developed online spaces that integrate shared resources, which include software data, collaboration tools, and often rely on high-performance computing. So the key here is that we're starting to move beyond thinking about using the products of science only or using the open publications of educational resources to more broadly addressing the practices and engaging students in some of the generation of these materials. So we're not just thinking about open licensing, we're thinking about, are they actually accessible? So FAIR standards come out of the open science community, and they stand for, is that information findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible? And these have specific meanings, which we can talk about at some point. Somehow I didn't get my link to the FAIR paper there. But BioQuest has been working on science education gateways, and we've been helped immensely by the SGCI community, which is this super group that is trying to amplify gateways which amplify science, right? So that gateways fail all the time. Right? You make a huge investment in them, nobody comes and uses them because the interface is horrible, or because the community management, or they can break in many, many ways. And so this long-time funded project is helping these online gateways be efficient so that they can amplify the science. And we got their help for the education gateway. Okay, so science gateways, well, can't stop before you talk about the Allen Institute. Just an immense resource and a real contribution to potentially to undergraduate education. I'm just throwing up a couple of examples of people we collaborate with. The NEON National Ecological Observatory Network, very parallel in some ways to Allen Institute. They're a contract with NSF to collect data. And there are big arguments in the ecology community about which data they should collect, but here they are. So they have something like 200 data types from 81 different field sites. They get atmospheric data and terrestrial data and aquatic data and individual sampling of organisms, and then they put it all up online. And they're trying to help both scientists and students use those resources. Oh, look at that, a science education gateway. So this was an article that a colleague, Drew Lamar, and I published from an NSF-funded project where we were addressing challenges in advancing quantitative skills in undergraduate biology. And we thought, well, that has to happen in a computational environment, and it has to be a national community. So we began working with the SGCI, the Gateways people, and they suggested a tool, and we got going on it. It's a space online that is designed to integrate a variety of services so that faculty can participate in professional activities from a distance, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if your school doesn't have a server that can run your own software. We have tools, right? You can plug in and run them online. It doesn't matter if you're the only one in your department that teaches genetics. We've got lots of geneticists, right? So the basic functionalities are support for projects. So there are spaces, user group defined spaces. So you have a login and password, and people can collaborate and share materials and communicate efficiently, and then recruit others into their project in that group space. Just how many people have heard of cubes? Okay, good. We're getting there. Most people are familiar with the Open Education Resource Library. So it's an open publishing space that is pretty robust, and you get a digital object identifier, you get a full citation, it's very stable, and for those of us who are professional teachers, that is our scholarship. And so we get very nice letters from people who say, I got promoted because I was able to cite the work that I've done on cubes, and that makes us feel very good. Here are some other services that at the time of the article we were sort of working on. Some of them we've made more progress with than others. I really want to get the teacher portfolios part going, so you can have an online sort of you can choose which parts of it are public and point people to it so they know you better. I also really like to coordinate better with DBER researchers who might access some of these projects or work with people who are using particular OER. So there's a lot going on. And I think one of our biggest successes was that we had built this system where people could interact in a virtual environment, And it helped us realize that, oh my gosh, professional development is broken, right? Not only do you have to go to your society meeting to, to go to the committee or the workshop where you're going to learn these things, but that's a one-shot deal, and there's no space in your head, right? You leave and you hope it's aspirational that you'll get back to that. So we built a professional learning model that is semester long. It was built for faculty, right? Low intensity, but long duration. And the whole idea is to cycle through the process of identifying a problem, working on that problem, customizing some existing materials, implementing them, maybe publishing back your customization, and then reporting it out. And and then COVID hit, and there we were with a space where you could work online, and we got lots of classrooms and things like that. Okay, let's see, I'm not sure what this transition is. Oh yeah, so we're talking about gateways. So one of the things about a gateway is that, computational environments have their constraints, right? It's a computer, it's dumb. You can tell it to do things. But the nice thing about having a gateway space is that you can sort of create social norms by the requirements that are built into your system. So when people publish in our Open Education Resources library, we give them space to tag all sorts of things, and I'll show you some examples in a few minutes. And the fact that they're publishing with a Creative Commons license, right? That's what we offer. I mean, there are a bunch of them that you can choose from, but that's the publication licensing that we're doing. And so you essentially, and there's some really interesting writing about this in the science gateways, you can promote particular strategies and ways to interact with the broader community through your gateway by the kind of structures that you have. And so this findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable piece is all these, it turns out they're computational challenges. We're pretty close to the point where your search is not going to be going to a particular database and searching for something. It's going to be probably AI assisted, or you're going to be searching in one place, but it's going to be looking in a lot of other places. And so what is required is that those databases are talking to each other. And so they sound like human terms, like, oh, can I reuse this? But really, mostly, these refer to computational processes, right? Is there a mechanism whereby you can pull down an OER, modify it, and republish it? Or you can grab data, run your script on it, do your science, come back a month later and rerun your script, right? It works. That's a computational challenge. But you also have to build the social context around that as well. So this is a different project that we're a little bit connected with, which is looking across open science and its contributions to this, again, socio-environmental research. And I like this figure because it emphasizes that these FAIR principles, right, that the materials are really talking about machine actionable things. And then there's this whole other set of awarenesses, which is called CARE, that really focus on things that are locally owned or indigenously generated. And so what's the collective benefit? What's the authority to control that? The responsibility of accessing it, and the ethics associated with accessing that data. So all of these things kind of find a balance between the technical and the social constraints. And so I know I'm blathering on a bit, but I'm trying to paint this big picture because your contributions are going to fit into these systems, and I want you to understand a little bit more about them so that you're not repulsed by them. So just a little bit more tech. So our current project, which I'll introduce in just a minute, is to think about what might this look like, right? If we had education service providers, maybe it's professional development, maybe it's an OER library, trying to work with open science and get these two gateways to do some of the work for you, right? And so there's a lot of steps, right? We have to get awareness about gateways going, changing the accessibility. It's going to be a lot of faculty training and pedagogical training as well. And you know, it's a certain breed of person that enjoys these discussions. And again, even for open educational resources, which I think we're probably more familiar with their structure, that they have this life cycle that really is dependent on fair principles, right? If we want people to find them and be able to use them, part of that is a computational process. And so this project is thinking about this linkage, right? So we've got a teaching resource. It's going out and pulling down some data from a data provider, and then it's pulling tools from somewhere to analyze that data. But each of these are open resources and can be modified and extended, right? New scientific data comes in, somebody changes the OER from a lecture into a 2-day lab thing. Maybe you want a different data set. And so, you know, they need to be coordinated, right? They're not 3 separate pieces, they're part of a system that operate together. And as you go through versions of all of these, they need to speak to each other so that you can maximize their impacts. And that's all about metadata. So here's an example from our Open Education Resource Library. It's a part of a full record. There's your title and the authors, short summary. Here's the license that they published under. Here's the publication information and the DOI, a variety of tags and metadata. There's a whole bunch of stuff below as well. But the important parts are, we are building these to connect you, right? If you're looking at this publication, it's telling you who published it. So you can go there, you can go to their group and see what else they've published. Because, oh, I like this one, let's see what else they've got. You can start to see the tool they've tagged, and you know, we've got to get better at which version of the tool and so forth. But, and then, you know, particular pedagogical strategies. We have metadata structures for inclusiveness in education, open science and education practices, and then, you know, this computational capacity to connect adaptations in the database so that when this author, who is published under a attribution license, right? So somebody can modify, allows modifications. When someone modifies this author, these authors get credit. Because in the database, it says, oh, well, you know, here are a couple of things, and this one doesn't have any, but here are people who have moved, you know, who've customized it for a different setting, so you might want to go look at those. And if you bump into one of theirs, it'll always link back to this one as the source. Again, it's professional credit, but it's also findability, accessibility, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. Ecosystem, it's a lot of stuff. Really important that these communications and connections be two-way, because the education is going to be contributing to the science. And we have to have mechanisms for that, and likewise the other way. Gateways are going to play a central role, and we're just going to have to learn to operate in that space and make them better. Metadata rules in terms of some of these computational interactions, and user communities can make or break these gateways because they are basically community projects. if people aren't contributing, then they don't have legs. Oh, look at that, faculty communities. Here we are. Okay. Just a little reality check. We're in a very special bubble here in Seattle in this beautiful building and these beautiful resources. Some students do have access to authentic scientific experiences. It's great, but the vast majority do not. There are some really innovative approaches being developed, but how those get out there is pretty limited. And I'm not saying that we have to directly address all of these, but it's an awareness, right? If you're concerned, oh, do I publish this thing, or it's such a pain in the butt, publish it, get it out there. Sometimes the open science people pay attention to educators, thank you, we love it. Other times, there can be real barriers because there's no support system for accessing that science. And open education strategies, the real focus in the first 15, 20 years, whatever it was price. Getting the price down, getting it into students' hands. And, we're moving beyond that now, but there's still a lot of emphasis on content coverage and not so much doing the science. So what we really need is some bridging. And this is again from that recent paper on some modules around ecology and evolution data. And I love this picture because I live in Pittsburgh, which is bridges everywhere. And so they have characterized their materials as, right, these are the kinds of linkages that are going to connect. They should be generative, right? The beauty of an open ecosystem is that it's generative, right? It can lead to positive cycles as things get improved. This is just a little bit of bragging. BioQuest is focused on undergraduate faculty, full stop. And so Adriana Kizar, a social scientist from USC, did a study of a small collection of reform projects in undergraduate STEM. There's Sensor again, we talked about earlier, and identified these communities as communities of transformation. And some of the drivers that made them communities of transformation were they're just around forever, right? It doesn't happen fast. If you're a faculty member and you're trying something, you're going to be back in a year or 2 or 3 to try it again. And so these communities play an important role in quietly sort of shepherding, giving people support, a safe space to work. And BioQuest got a little bit of a call out for not packaging everything all the way and simply saying, look, here's some resources, here's some ideas, go do the hard part. Another supportive community to keep an eye on, the Rios Institute, Racially Just, Inclusive, and Open STEM Education, part of the leadership here. You may recognize 2 of us. I would highly recommend keeping your eyes out for Rios resources addressing that equity, accessibility, and inclusiveness, taking it very seriously. And then just to follow up on that, I stumbled across this philosophy of open science for diverse research environments. So I don't know if you've done much philosophy of science, but these people argue about anything. And so they're looking at different open science communities and trying to come out with a consistent sort of philosophy or set of beliefs and activities. And it's very early, and I kind of poached this off of a poster of theirs because it was really intriguing to me. But one of their early findings was that people wanted inclusion to be the goal, some of their open activities. And so they really tried hard to be transparent, suggesting that the action would lead towards inclusion. But systematically, they found that the projects that focused on the inclusion, did the work that they were hoping the final outcome would be, would actually generate materials that were more transparent. So it was just really interesting to me, that inversion, because I always think of inclusion as the end point as well, but maybe that's the beginning point. Okay, faculty professional learning. It's not a 2-hour workshop. It's a semester-long, collaborative, productive opportunity to create something with your colleagues. These are all just sort of support systems, right? There are a bunch of open science resources and communities. FORT is one that's focused on training programs in open science, and this is their framework for training. These are their different curriculum sections. And there's the open science framework. And these tools are out there and they're available, and you can use them with your class. Another group that's very helpful. So this is the Open Scholarship Catalytic Awards program from the Open Research Community Accelerator, ORCA, lovely acronym. And Karen is leading a project called Developing Resources for an Undergraduate Open Science Open Pedagogy Program. So how do we talk to students about the open science that they're doing? And here are some of the goals of that. And I bring this up because they're going to be calling for proposals again in October of this year. So you might want to keep an eye out for that. And here's another support system. This is our new research coordination network. So NSF has a category of funding that is really focused on bringing together communities that don't generally interact with one another. And so we are the Open Education Ecosystem Research Coordination Network, and we are trying to connect the service providers with the teachers and the education people with the scientists and talk across these things, and the vocabulary is horrible. But I think it's exactly what NSF is after. The products of RCNs are generally synthetic papers and more proposals, right? Because they're not very rich projects, but they're important, and they're an opportunity to really invest in some new things. So we've just gotten started. We've started to work with the steering committee and a few other people to map out what we're trying to do. We've got a skeletal website up on Cubes, and we've been doing some presentations to raise awareness. We're moving into the onboarding of partners and establishing some of the shared metadata so that we can change our records and connect to other science gateways. And then starting in the fall, we'll start doing some more professional development activities. Research coordination networks don't give you money to develop things. They give you money to sort of amplify other people's work. So that's what's going on there. Okay, I'm desperately... Oh, and most importantly, this is it. This is the advanced guard, right? This is the cutting edge for using open science and open education. And my goal here was to sort of overwhelm you with this vast array of things that are going on. Not that it has to be front and center, right? You're in your classroom, or you're running your open science resource, or whatever it is, but you do need to get it out there. You need to connect, right? And so you're going to play a role as a translator and a mentor and an advocate, and that's going to be important. And so the takeaways: don't try to do it alone. It's just not nearly as interesting or as effective. Open is about connecting, right? If you're trying to make it accessible, you're interacting with somebody else to understand what their needs are. And I don't know if people are familiar with Alan Kay, who did a lot of object-oriented programming early on and developed Scratch and things like that. Very innovative use of computers as thinking tools. His statement was, if you are trying to predict the future, the best way is to invent it. So we'd invite you to participate and invent the future. So if you'd like to connect with the Open Education Ecosystem RCN, I can put this out in other formats. You can zap it right now. We have 3 or 4 question survey that will get you into our list so we can send you stuff when opportunities arise. And with that, I appreciate all of your attention and all the words that I was able to get out, but I have 4 minutes left to take some questions and expand on anything you'd like to hear. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. Could have gone on.
All right, so our mic runners are going to be coming around with the microphones. So when you raise your hand for a question, please do wait for the microphone. Do we have any questions? Well, while you ponder, I will just say that as I was writing my intro, I was just like, all right, I think I should just get out of the way and let Sam say all of this stuff better than I ever could. And oh my gosh, this perfectly captures the spirit of what we're trying to do here at the Allen Institute. And I think everybody else in this room has a lot to relate to in this presentation.
And contribute.
And contribute too, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, I see a question.
Thanks again for the talk. I found it really interesting, your point about the discrepancies between open science versus open education. I guess I would want to know what you think is sort of the critical bridge that takes this really, like, you know, I understand open science basically is this super rich database that's oftentimes not the easiest for any random person to parse, as someone who's tried to parse a bunch of these databases. Whereas, you know, open education, its whole focus is accessibility. So it seems like, what do you think creates the bridge most tangibly? If that's is that a sensible question?
Yeah, I don't think there's a single thing, would be the quick answer. You know, some of the examples are these sort of large-scale distributed projects, right? That's a curriculum that's published and can be modified for your own setting, but you're buying into a community where your students can post their posters and give feedback to posters from other campuses, right? So it's giving you an opportunity to take your work beyond your classroom, and that work involves, you know, doing some science, whether it's collecting your own data or working with existing data. And then, you know, the other thing that I think is going to emerge over time is there's this continuum of training, right? Researchers need training, and that's a real thing. Well, teachers need training, students need training. And when I say training, I'm thinking about, you know, how to use it kind of thing. And so I think one of the biggest losses in undergraduate education is that so many faculty who are on a teaching track, whose primary responsibility is teaching, have a research background in some area. They have interests or specializations, but it's very difficult to keep that going when your day is full of student engagement and classroom work. And so if we can bring some of that science back, it enriches the teacher, right? I have a research program. My class does it with me. So I think, and you know, so I think there are lots and lots of spaces where those intersections can occur, but fostering them is going to take some work, and we have to recognize it. And so, you know, not so much in this room, but in other settings, it's an awareness issue. And so thanks for the question. It was a good one.
Hey, Sam. That was awesome, of course. You're amazing. But I did want to take us back to the idea that you mentioned. You mentioned two things about the accessibility of these resources. They're not always accessible necessarily. And the second part, which was probably mission critical for me, was that they're not really free, because the generation of these things actually requires time and effort and all of that. Are you aware of any strategies, groups, organizations that are out there that are trying to find ways to fund these efforts and to effectively pay folks to do the work? Because like at my institution and others like mine, I'm still battling against the administration that says OER is not scholarship and OER is not this and OER is not that. So if you're aware of anything, I'd appreciate some feedback on that one as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a very difficult question, but I have to ask.
No, it's good. We're all looking for those things. Grant-funded projects often have a little bit of support for faculty participation, contributions to materials. I think the real power, and it sounds cheap, but the real power lays in getting professional credit, right? So we all do things because it impresses the dean, or it's part of our job, right? Why isn't this part of our job? And it doesn't mean it makes it easier, but at least when I go through collecting a little bit of data on my class and reflecting on it and sharing it to the community so that other people can modify my OER, I can say, hey, look, there are hundreds of people using this. And that's a level of impact that is credit, right? It's not going to pay the bills, but if it keeps your job, maybe it will. But anyone else have suggestions where you might look for resources to bridge, amplify?
I mean, there are community organizations like Open Education Global. The Community College Consortium for OER is really an important one, and both of those are part of the same kind of structure, and they're funded by the Hewlett Foundation. So you're right, like open educational resources are not free to make, but they're supposed to be free for students, and so a lot of it is about cutting out the middleman in the production of the resources so that they aren't super expensive. Like you type something up on a Google Doc and put it out on the web, it's an OER if you put an open license on it. So obviously we want higher quality stuff than that most of the time. But there are communities, the Rebus community, that are trying to bring people together so that the work is recognized. There's a whole promotion and tenure recognition part of the Doers organization that's looking at that. Like how do we bring more recognition for faculty so that institutions will support it so that it can be available. There's a lot of pushback from publishers, from journal publishers, from textbook publishers, because they saw really big drops in the market. OER really started to take off, and then there was a lot of pushback. So we have to just keep pushing back and making education about supporting students and learners and not about somebody just trying to make a buck off of especially some of the most vulnerable populations that there are, which are our students. So sorry to be moving into a speech, but there's no easy answer to the question, but I think we all have to be kind of part of that solution.
Yeah, I'm going to add one more thing that we do here at the Allen Institute, which is that we work with teams who have a research grant that want to do an education component that's part of it. And then the education team can piggyback on some of that funding. So for those of you who are at research institutions, that's also an option that may present itself. That's not necessarily available to everyone. So we are at time for this talk, but we are going to have a break after this next session, so you can find Sam and ask further questions after our next block of talks, and also for the next 2 days.